Okay, so this is going to be a more sensitive topic. This is one that I'm not 100% sure how much I can say about it, but it's interesting nonetheless. So, in regards to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, there was a director that came out in support of Israel. A lot of you guys might know him. His name is Neil Druckman. Now, Neil Druckman, he was the director for The Last of Us. I believe The Last of Us and The Last of Us 2, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Now, Neil decided to make The Last of Us into a pretty woke series. So, for example, if we're going to get into The Last of Us 2, they promoted the idea of cancel culture. So in The Last of Us 2, there is a scene in which a guy calls a woman a slur. The slur being for someone who is attracted to other women, right? A very masculine type of woman a very masculine woman who loves other women. Let's just say that, okay? And in the video game, what happens is the main character from The Last of Us, what's his name right now? I can't think of his actual name, but he just punches the guy who said it, right? And then the leader of this local gang or whatever basically comes out and says, hey, he said something stupid, he's sorry, here, let us make it up to you. And he has his guy, the guy who said the slur, to make like a cupcake as a sign of forgiveness, or like as a sign of I'm sorry, like an apology. Yeah, that's it. And the girl takes the cupcake, thanks him, gives the cupcake away, and then basically says that she's never going to forgive him, no matter what. This guy got his face punched in. He was made to apologize. He made a cupcake. He went above and beyond. Was humiliated in public in several different ways. And no forgiveness is allowed. That's a very cancel culture type argument to make. They made Ellie gay, and then they made the girlfriend of Ellie into a Jewish girl. Well, there's nothing wrong with that, but there was an interesting part of the game where you actually visit a Jewish synagogue, and you aren't allowed to do any damage to the synagogue. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that. Why they wouldn't allow you to just start shooting up a synagogue even if it's abandoned and falling to pieces. It's a set piece, right? And it's just meant to progress the story. But what they were doing is they were preventing people from acting out against Jewish religion and culture so that the players wouldn't be able to enact anti-Semitic fantasies, basically. Now, that's all, you can say that's all well and good and everything. It takes away your agency, but it's not that big of a deal. But it should be mentioned that there's a lot of video games in which you can have fights in holy sites of Christians. For example, in the old Age of Empires games, you could make monasteries. And obviously those monasteries could be burned down. In the Assassin's Creed series, they often have fights in churches and cathedrals. And you could, just spray the blood of your enemies in front of the the tabernacle. In medieval Total War 2, a game that was made a long time ago, but still relevant, if you want to talk about the Total War series, if ever you assassinated the Pope, he would be assassinated inside of a cathedral. And in other series, like say Medieval Shogun 2, Christians are persecuted. If you try to turn Christian, you get a whole bunch of rebellions. In Shikiro, I actually think that Japanese temples, they would be Buddhist temples, I believe, were burned down in the course of the video game. Or you could desecrate temples by killing the monks inside them. Now, granted, those monks were corrupted in Shikiro, but that's beyond the point. The point is that Neil Druckmann and The Last of Us is a pretty woke series, and he's a pretty woke guy. So, apparently a lot of leftists didn't realize that Neil is Israeli. So, Neil obviously went online on Twitter and basically came out in support of his home country, Israel. And a lot of leftists were very angry about it. I mean, they started tearing into him, saying how evil he is and all of this other nasty stuff. Now, if you're going by sorry, I was getting a phone call there. If you're going by the standards of the left, if you criticize a minority, especially a Jewish man, that makes you anti-Semitic. I mean, after all, if you say anything bad about George Soros, you'll be called anti-Semitic, despite the fact that George Soros is very publicly atheist. He has come out as atheist. He worked as a kid with the Nazis those wacky Jewish people, or those wacky German people, excuse me, to confiscate property from Jewish people who had been taken to the camps. So, yeah, that's a thing, right? If you criticize a Jewish person, a lot of times the left will call you anti-Semitic. Well, Neil Druckmann is Jewish, and he's being criticized by the left. And he is a woke guy who made a woke series. I'm not going to get into all of the different things about The Last of Us that's woke. It's just everything else. There's just a lot more to it, okay? There's a lot to that series that I can use to convince you that yes, it is woke. So that's what's going on with Neil Druckmann. Now, something that needs to be pointed out is a lot of minorities inside the United States tend to vote Democrat. I looked it up, and in 2020, of the Jewish people who voted, 76% of them voted for Biden. 22% of them voted for Donald Trump. Now look at Arabs. Now the actual number for the Arab community, the Muslim community, because it didn't sort them by Arab or by Muslim, so it didn't sort them by the race, Muslim, and it didn't sort out the religion either, which is Islam. But for the religion, it says other, right? And it said 64 or 66, or was it 68? It was somewhere in the high 60 range. Mid to high 60 range. Said that people of other religions besides Judaism, besides Christianity, besides Protestants voted for Biden. Now look at Hamtramck. If people know about Hamtramck and Dearborn, they're two cities in Michigan that have high Muslim populations. In fact, in Hamtramck, they actually play the call to prayer. Now, I've been to both in the neighborhoods, and people there pretty nice. I try to avoid it at night, but that's just Detroit in general. Dearborn is definitely safer than Detroit. Hamtramck, I'm not 100% sure about, honestly. I assume it's safer because in many areas it's basically just all Muslims. And they're a pretty tight-knit community, kind of like how the Jewish people are usually pretty tight-knit. There's also an Orthodox Jewish community inside and around Detroit. Detroit is well known for having segregated a lot of its people in order to promote the tossed salad theory of race relations, where the theory is that everyone of each individual race should stay in their own neighborhood in order for them to preserve their traditions and the architecture and the culture of those neighborhoods would be allowed to be homogeneous, so that they wouldn't melt into the population. They could hold on to all their traditions because it was believed that everyone losing their traditions was racist. And they went the exact opposite direction and basically formed a whole bunch of tiny little ghettos of minorities who never intermixed with each other and tended to have racial issues with other minorities and other communities. So they went in the exact opposite direction that the South did with segregation. But it still ends up at the same place: racism. In the South, they didn't want you to keep your culture. In the North, they wanted you to keep your culture, but they still segregated you. Now that was mostly Detroit. The Irish were mistreated. The Polish were put in their own little community. The blacks had their own little community. The Arabs had their own little community. The French had their own little community. All this kind of stuff, right? The Mexicans had their own little community called Mexico Town, which still exists to this day, by the way. It's a very dangerous place. In fact, it's South Detroit. South Detroit. There is no such thing as South Detroit, because if you go south of Detroit, you end up in Canada. So it's more like Southwest Detroit, technically. So, anyways, the Arabs and the Muslims, two different things technically, tend to also vote Democrat. Now there's two people in Congress that you might know of: Rashida Tlaib from Michigan, where I'm from, and Ilhan Omar from Minnesota, which Minnesota is a pretty Democrat-held state right now. And while the Democrats technically won in Michigan, they won by a very slim minority. Michigan is a pretty purple state. It'll go either way depending. And I have a feeling it's going to go for Republicans this time around, because it was the first time in decades that Democrats actually won the House and the Senate, and they both won them by like 2-seat majorities. So in the House it's 56-54 Dems to Republicans. And then in the Senate, it's 20 to 18 Democrats to Republicans. They also won the Attorney General spot, the Secretary of State spot, and they re-elected Whitmer. This was between 2020 and 2022. But a lot of the townships, which townships make up 95% of the state, the majority of townships have partisan positions. So if you're a mayor of a small city or even a village, they generally don't list parties. They'll list parties for Lansing, for Detroit, I think for Grand Rapids, and I think that's about it. I'm not 100% sure about Grand Rapids. I think it's 3 major cities in Michigan, 3 or 4 major cities in Michigan that actually lists their parties. Now for the townships, which make up 95% of the land area, their positions are partisan. Instead of having mayors in town and having towns, townships can have a city, basically. They can have several towns, several villages, or several communities. Now they're not called cities, towns, villages, or communities, or anything like that. They're all part of the township. So you could have like small, 2 little, like miniature cities or towns in a township that aren't considered towns. They don't have mayors. Instead, townships have supervisors and trustees and secretaries and treasurers, and those people list their parties on the ballot. The majority of positions in Michigan that have parties listed fell to Republicans. Now in the actual election, it's like 52% of people who voted for Democrats in major races, and 46% people voted for Republicans. When you take in account the townships as well, it's like 51.5 to 46.5. So like slightly higher for Republicans, but still majority Democrat. But it just goes to show you that even though the majority of positions in Michigan are run by Republicans, and at least the non-partisan ones, or partisan ones, I always forget which is which, honestly. It's so confusing how they say like non-partisan when they refer to races that have parties, I think, which doesn't make any sense to me. But maybe I'm wrong about that. But I'm getting way off topic here. The point is that a lot of the Muslim communities and a lot of the Jewish communities vote Democrat. However, when you look at Talib and Omar, who are Muslim, who are Democrat, they do not support Israel. They support Palestine. Now, there is a difference between Palestine and Hamas. I mentioned that in my last video, which you got to keep in mind. But the fact that the Democrats will not come out against one side or the other, or probably take off both sides. The Democrats will not come out against Israel because it will hurt the relationship with the Muslim community. They will also not come out against Palestine. Did I get that backwards? They will not come out against Israel because it will hurt the relationships with the Jewish community. and they won't come out against Palestine because it will hurt their relationships with the Muslim community. Now, a lot of Muslims don't like Palestine and Hamas, and a lot of Jewish people don't like Israel. So that you have to keep that in mind. But Tlaib was asked if she condemns the violence going on in Palestine. Specifically, there were 40 babies, Jewish babies, as far as we're aware, that were beheaded and burned on the border of the Gaza Strip. So Hamas kidnapped women, children, murdered families of civilians, took hostages, slaughtered babies. You know, the most innocent among us. And Tlaib refused to condemn that, and then put a Palestinian flag in front of her office. Hundreds of Muslims in Dearborn came out in support of Palestine. Now, like I said, 76% of Jewish voters who voted in 2020, according to the survey, voted for Biden. When the last mayor of New York was in office, de Blasio, and this has been going on for a long time too, is that there's been a lot of violence against the Jewish community. Orthodox Jews are often attacked on the street of New York City. Right? When de Blasio was in office and COVID was going on, there was a video that came out of a bunch of Jewish people, hundreds of Jewish people, going to a Jewish wedding, a traditional Jewish wedding, and celebrating, all packed in there without masks, celebrating up a storm. And de Blasio came out on Twitter and said that he will find those Jewish people and throw them in jail for violating COVID mandates. Not COVID laws, COVID mandates. And he would punish the Jewish community for that. Whereas, when Ramadan was going on, de Blasio came out in full throat in support of them, saying that they should come out to the streets, gather in mass crowds, and celebrate. And they did the same thing with Antifa and BLM. They came out in mass crowds to paint the LGBT flag in front of Trump Tower. I think it was Trump Tower, it was one of Trump's buildings. You know, stick it to Orange Man. Anti-Jewish sentiment is very strong in New York City. New York City is also heavily Democrat. And the Jewish community is also heavy Democrat. Now, when your choices are between Israel and Palestine, right? You can make arguments for both sides. I mentioned this before. But the people committing a lot of war crimes right now, hurting civilians, is Hamas. Hamas kidnapped women and children, civilians, executed a lot, did other things to the women, too, that I can't mention. Horrible, horrible things. They are committing war crimes. Hamas also uses their own people, Palestinians, as human shields. They put rocket batteries on skyscrapers with a lot of their people, force the people to stay in the building. And Israel has the choice of letting those batteries continue the fire, or to return fire and take them out, probably killing a lot of civilians inside the building. When the Iron Dome is being overwhelmed, a lot of the rockets are going to get through. So you can allow them to continuously fire rockets, overwhelming the dome, and pieces of the rockets that do get shot down will still cause damage when they land and kill the Jewish community, showing that Israel cannot defend its borders and encouraging other Arab countries nearby to declare war and invade because Israel looks weak. Or Israel can return fire, destroying those batteries, blowing up the buildings as part of the collateral, and killing a whole bunch of civilians on top of it. So Israel doesn't have a lot of options there. They can either let themselves be shelled into oblivion and encourage other countries to invade them, or they can return fire and kill a whole bunch of civilians. Technically unintentionally, because they're just trying to take out the rocket batteries, but bombs are not exactly precision. Even missiles, even if they hit the target, the rockets are on skyscrapers with a lot of civilians in them. There's not anything you can do about it. Unless you use like a very low explosive warhead that only takes out the top floor or so. But even then, once you start destroying floors on the top levels, they tend to collapse and then takes down all the floors beneath it anyways. And it's pretty hard to get a missile to just explode on the rooftop. It will probably go through the first, second, and maybe even the third floors, collapsing the top 3 floors, causing the rest of the building to collapse, destroying the rocket battery, but also destroying the building. So Israel is in an impossible position on that front. Now Palestine, their leadership back in the 70s said that they didn't want any help from Israel. They wanted nothing to do with Israel. They didn't want any supplies from Israel. They wanted absolutely no support from Israel whatsoever. And they got exactly what they wanted when Israel cut off the electricity and water to that part of the country. That was as much to do with the Palestinians' decision as it did with Israel's decision. Well, of course, a lot of people weren't happy with that arrangement, then threw their backing, their support behind Hamas, which then used the Palestinian people as human shield, like I said, making the whole situation worse. Because while a lot of Palestinians didn't want any help from Israel, now they were locked in this little area that they couldn't escape from, because Egypt also didn't want any of the Palestinians to come and flood their country as refugees, because it would overwhelm their support systems and lead Hamas and other terrorist groups, because Hamas did exist before they took over Palestine. They were terrorist groups inside of Palestine, a terrorist group, and they later took over the entire country. So Egypt closed their borders to the Gaza Strip because they didn't want any Islamic terrorists to come in, because they would be fighting against the Egyptian government trying to take over that country. Because you got to remember, Islamic extremists don't always get along. Like I mentioned, Al-Qaeda is fighting against ISIL right now. ISIL-K. The Kurds, which are often Arabs, people who are part of the Islamic community, some of the Kurds are Islamic extremists. And they fight against Iraq, which is an Arab country. There's Chechen extremists that are fighting to free Chechnya from Russia. But they're just as willing to kill Chechens who support Russia. And those Chechens are also Muslim. So, what does this mean for the Jewish and Arab communities? When the Democrats don't come out and support of one side or the other, however, 2 Muslim congresswomen don't condemn Hamas, and one of them openly supports Palestine, which is controlled by terrorists, and a lot of Muslims in Dearborn are coming out in support of Palestine. And all over the country, in New York City, they're coming out in support of Palestine. Well, the Jewish community, which makes up 2% of the nation, is probably not going to be very happy about all of these left-wing people coming out in support of Palestine. Especially since BLM and Antifa both came out in support of Palestine. And they are supporting the terroristic behavior of Palestine and Hamas. Now, not every Palestinian, like I said, a lot of them are prisoners in there because they can't go to Israel because Hamas won't let them leave. Israel won't let them enter. And they can't go to Egypt because Egypt won't let them enter there either. So what do? Well, there's not a hell of a lot you can't do. But with all these left-wing organizations and these left-wing congresswomen coming out in support of Palestine, the Jewish community is not going to be happy. Hell, a lot of the Muslim community in Dearborn don't support Tlaib. They've come out against her, too. A lot of people have come out in support of Palestine, and she came out in support of Palestine. She might regain some Muslim votes because she came out in support of Palestine, but she might also lose Muslim votes because she came out in support of Palestine. And she'll also lose Jewish votes because she came out in support of Palestine. So you can see what the issue is there. It'll be interesting to see how the Muslim communities and Jewish communities will vote in the upcoming 2024 election because of this attack. The Democrat Party is in charge of the presidency. They're in charge of the Senate, which means they're also in charge of the intelligence communities, in theory. And the intelligence communities missed this attack by Hamas against Israel, as did Mossad, by their own admission. Whereas Joe Biden is coming out in support of Israel, or ally, and Democrats like Tlaib are coming out in support of Palestine, you will have Muslims turn against both the pro-Palestine faction and the pro-Israel faction. And more than likely, their support amongst the Muslim community will go down in general. Whereas the Democrats are supporting Israel, but then you have Democrats supporting Palestine. I have a theory that support amongst the Jewish community will also go down. The Jewish community's support for Democrats will also go down, because it was Joe Biden's failure and weakness that allowed these attacks to, one, proceed, and two, for our intelligence community to completely miss this. Because the intelligence community is focused against going against MAGA now. According to a whistleblower, the FBI is trying to fight. It's trying to arrest MAGA supporters for being extremists. Now, the CIA would be the ones to figure out if an attack by Hamas was going to happen. And then the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security are the ones who are supposed to prevent terrorists coming in from the southern border. But the border's wide open, and while they caught 100 terrorists on the terrorist watch list, there's a lot more sneaking through the cracks. And they might even be going through the northern border too, which is entirely possible because the northern border isn't as guarded as the southern border. And it's bigger. So there might be... So the CIA is also going to be focused on people flying to Canada and flying to Mexico, flying to South America, and coming in from that direction. Maybe even flying in from the Caribbean, going on a boat to Mexico, then going on a boat, then traveling across the border in South America. So the CIA is focused on probably counterintelligence and counterterrorism going on in our nearby neighbors in South America, while the FBI and the DHS are focused on internal terrorists coming through the southern and northern borders. And because Joe Biden is weak and Hamas didn't think that America would intercede because America didn't join the war on behalf of Ukraine, and every time Joe Biden says that he's going to support Taiwan, well, his cabinet comes out and says that no, we're not changing our position on how we're going to on Taiwan. No, it's still the one state system. Taiwan's still part of China. Yeah, that's right. Don't worry about Joe Biden saying that he would defend Taiwan. Yeah, a lot of countries look at that and realize that Joe Biden is not in charge, and if he's not going to defend Taiwan, why would he defend our other allies, like Israel? So Hamas thought they could completely get away with it. And then, when this whole thing started, Joe Biden sent, supposedly Joe Biden, the Joint Chiefs of Staff sent an entire fleet to go to Israel, and then some moron, Joe Biden himself probably, allowed it to leak that our special forces guys are in Israel getting ready to take back our hostages. So we gave up our element of surprise. We gave up. We told the enemy that we're coming and what they're going to target. So that means our troops are now in danger, because when they go and try to get the hostages back, they're probably going to get ambushed, or there's going to be way more defenses there than they were hoping for, or Joe Biden allowed this to leak, or his cabinet allowed it to leak, whichever one, allowed it to leak because they're going to use that as a negotiation, a strong arm tactic to try to force Hamas to give up or troops or the hostages, the American hostages that they're holding. Right? So the administration is basically either put our troops in danger or basically hinting that they're going to negotiate with terrorists. Yeah, support amongst the Black, the Hispanic communities, and the Asian communities for Democrats was already going way the hell low. Because Democrats did not help the Black community. They came out and arrested their political opponent, which makes Trump hood. And a lot of rappers are coming out in support of Trump. And you can see a lot of videos of people from the hood coming out in support of Trump. The Hispanic community is not happy with Joe Biden because their communities are being overrun by illegals. And their communities already have enough trouble as it is. And those communities, oftentimes they came into the country legally, taking a decade in some cases to get here. And then all these people jumped the line ahead of them, coming in here within days of deciding they want to be here. And a lot of Hispanic people who are here legally feel cheated. Now you got Democrats coming down on both sides of this conflict, on both the Palestine and Israel sides. So their support amongst them are also going to be negative. Now the Republicans are also coming out in support of Palestine and Israel. Or the Republicans are mostly coming out in support of Israel. So you might think that a lot of Israelis would switch to Republican. A lot of Palestinians, or a lot of the Muslim community, who won't vote for Democrat or Republicans because they're coming out in support of Israel. So while the number of Muslim supporters for Democrats is probably going to go lower, the amount of supporters, Muslim supporters for the Republicans probably won't go up that much. There might be some, but it won't be a lot. But the Jewish community is probably going to come out, it's probably going to vote less for Democrats and either not vote at all or vote more for Republicans because of this. So either way, Republicans are probably going to get more votes from minority groups, and Democrats are going to get less votes from minority groups. And they, like I said, they already ticked off the Black community, the Hispanic community, and then the Asian community is ticked off because left-leaning colleges like Harvard are still trying to push through affirmative action to reject Asian applicants. I mean, people who weren't going to go to college anyways, you think that they're going to be happy about affirmative action? No, they're not going to care about affirmative action if they weren't going to go to college. People who think that affirmative action is racist, that it's demeaning, that it's degrading to them, are going to come out against that. Especially if they had high grades. Whereas people who had low grades who got in via affirmative action might come out and support Democrats. But that was the case otherwise. But now, these Asians believed that they could go through the system, get rid of affirmative action, and then get into a good college. And the left-wing administrators came out and screwed them over once again. Yeah, minorities are not going to vote as much for Democrats this time around. All across the board. All across the board. Unless they get a whole bunch of illegals to vote, which is way harder than you think it is, because most states still require you to have an ID and for you to be a citizen. If you're not a citizen and you're in an area illegally, you're probably not going to get the vote. Joe Biden said that he's going to give illegals IDs, but the 3 states on the border are New Mexico, California, Texas, and Arizona. Right? Texas is not going to allow illegals to vote. They're not. Illegals voting in California is not going to make a difference. The same exact thing with New Mexico. The only place where it might have an effect, those IDs, is in Arizona. And I can guarantee you, there's not as much illegals in Arizona as there are in Texas or California. And a lot of people crossing the border to Texas actually wanted to go to New York City, and Chicago, because they're sanctuary cities that have offered free room and board. Not sure about Chicago, but they definitely offered free stuff for illegals. So Illinois and New York, which are probably going to be blue anyways, a lot of illegals are going there. Texas is not going to flip. The 4 states that are going to have most of the illegals, New Mexico, California, New York, and Illinois, the 4 states that are most likely to let illegals vote are already going to be blue. And a lot of the Hispanic people, the legal Hispanic people, the black people in these minority communities, are not going to be happy that their communities are being overrun by illegals. You could say that, and it's not like a 1-to-1. There's not an equal amount of illegals going in Chicago as there are black people in those same communities. Black people vote majority for Democrat. And if you lose half the black people in that community to the Republicans somehow, some way, or hell, just a 10th, a 20th, maybe, you're going to lose a whole lot more votes than you're going to gain by illegal migrants. Illegal migrants who are probably not going to want to vote in the first place because maybe they don't speak the language, maybe they can't read the ballots because they don't speak English, maybe because they don't want to be seen in the open in such a public place where there's police. Maybe because they don't want to risk being deported. Because they don't care about our elections. Because they're not American. And they don't want to be American. They just want free stuff. Yeah, you're going to lose more votes bringing in illegals than you're going to gain by bringing in illegals and having them vote. Because they're not going to vote. Even if you give them IDs. Yeah, Democrats are screwed, man. They're screwed 5 ways to Sunday. They just are. So, yeah, I mean, it's a roundabout thing. I went into a roundabout fashion there, but the Democrats have pissed off every minority possible. The only possible minority, or the only possible population that might make up for it is the white population. And the white population is hurt by the economy too. Things are looking very rosy for Donald Trump right now. Because under Donald Trump, he will bring peace. That's his promise. He will bring peace. He will stop the Israelis and Palestinians from fighting. Which will be a good thing, which will both the Muslim and Jewish communities will support. Whereas Trump will also stop the illegal immigrants, which will appease the black communities being flooded by illegals. It will appease the Hispanic communities being flooded by illegals. it will also, and he'll also appease the Asian community, because Trump won't support affirmative action or affirmative action laws. Kind of went the wrong way there. So, yeah, that's all I can say about that. That was a 50-minute long video right there. I apologize for that, but I have a lot to say on that one. Anyways, that's it for now.